Good evening, you late night owls. Welcome to a special late night episode of Garage Game Day Sports. I'm your host, as always, Louis Longoria. We are talking the college football playoff national championship game. Number 1, Alabama. Number 3, Ohio State. It is just over right this second. Alabama, kings of the football world, once again. Let's break down and review this championship game. Alabama, 12-0 SEC champs, coming off that blowout over Notre Dame in the Rose Bowl, taking on Ohio State, 7-0. You know, we all know they had those some issues with COVID. Their opponents had issues with COVID, so they had a few games wiped out, but won the Big Ten championship and blew out Clemson. Justin Fields, 6 touchdowns in that game over the Tigers in the Sugar Bowl. Today, the first quarter and a half was pretty entertaining. You know, Alabama and Ohio State trading touchdowns in the first quarter, going back and forth. We found out Jalen Waddle was deemed good to go. He gave that ankle some work in pregame warmups. That turned out good. He was good to go. So he suited up today for the Tide. Had a few decent catches, contributed. But the story, the Alabama offense going hard, scoring often. Mac Jones. Who? Mac Jones. Balling, getting everybody involved. 464 yards through the air, 5 touchdowns, 4 of those in the first half. He got everybody rolling. He really set the tone. Calm, collected in the pocket, making plays, making throws. Accuracy off the charts, 83% in the first half. Hit Devontae Smith plenty of times. You heard Devontae Smith's name a lot today, the Heisman Trophy winner, balling out also. Over 200 yards through the air, 3 tutties. Did have a hand injury late in the second half of this game, so he sat out. He wasn't really needed because by that time he had done all his damage. Alabama was out to a big lead at halftime. It was already 35-17 at that point, and they could smell blood in the water. Alabama was very active from the get-go. You know, swarming, making tackles, making plays. Christian Barmore leading that defense, just making plays all over the place. You know, making Justin Fields uncomfortable. Big hits. This game was very physical from the beginning. You had hit after hit. You had Najee Harris absorb a huge hit in the second half of this game. You had an ejection, a targeting call that, you know, based on, you know, what you think, I think it was rightly called, but that call may need some tweaking. You know, hit on Ohio State tight end Jeremy Ruckert. So you had big hits going on in this game, but Alabama just making plays on both sides of the field, mixing it up, quick strikes, big plays down the field, really burning Ohio State's secondary. This was not a good day at the office for the Buckeye secondary, getting torched. And then you'd have Alabama mixing these sustained drives, you know, long, half a quarter long drives that were resulting in at least 3 points, often touchdowns, and just wearing down the Buckeyes defense. You know, going back to that targeting call, you had Jordan Battle that was ejected for that hit on Jeremy Ruckert. Ruckert did have a nice one, had to catch early when Ohio State was still threatening. You know, they were just making Fields uncomfortable. He bounced back with that toss to Ruckert, but for the most part, he was just uncomfortable in this game. You know, they were making life miserable for him. They only had only one sack on Fields, but a lot of tackles for loss in this game, a lot of quarterback hurries, pressures. The Tide was just making plays on both sides of the ball. Najee Harris, you know, 150 total all-purpose yards, had a touchdown through the air, 2 touchdowns on the ground. So you had everybody step up in this game. There's just so many weapons. You can't really cover everybody in this game. You know, you had Mechie, 7 catches in this game. Smith, Harris, and Waddle, all 3 of them went for at least 7 catches. And then Harris, of course, getting it done on the ground too. It didn't help Ohio State's cause that they had Trey Sermon go down. The very first drive of the game, first carry for Sermon, went for 2 yards. He came up holding his shoulder, holding his collarbone, had trouble picking up his arm. So at that point, you knew it was serious. Went to the back, got evaluated. They took him to the hospital. It was an apparent collarbone injury. He never came back, so that right away put Ohio State behind the 8 ball. Then they lost their one of their starting linemen, Wyatt Davis, just before halftime. They lost him to an injury. Knew he wasn't going to come back, so things were stacking up on Ohio State. But Alabama just all over the place, making plays. Steve Sarkisian, just really, really outstanding play calling. He's going to my Longhorns next year. I'm thrilled with the team that Texas has. We saw some of those young guns ball out in the Alamo Bowl. And Steve Sarkisian, his play calling was just top-notch today. He just outcoached and outclassed Ryan Day. The plays that he was making, different schemes, you had different guys. You were getting the ball to different receivers, different ways. That was just confusing Ohio State's defense. And then you had on defense the Tide, blitzing from different directions, different ways, different schemes. You had them on Ohio State all game long. Ohio State just couldn't make adjustments. This was 35-17 at halftime. It felt 35-7. It really did. Alabama just blowing up with a 28-point second quarter. Dominating time of possession. They already had a slight lead in time of possession. Then they opened the third quarter with just a huge drive that ate up about 7.5 minutes, about half the quarter. They tacked on another touchdown at that point. That really put it out of reach. They ate up the whole third quarter, and Ohio State, had a touchdown, responded with a touchdown after that. Justin Fields had a real nice run. But Ohio State was always just out of this. After halfway through the second quarter, this was just all Alabama. They set the record for most points in a championship game with 52. Final score was 52-24, and Alabama was just too much, and we just saw that domination throughout the season. They had little hiccups here and there, but all teams go through that, and most teams will go through a loss. Alabama would just struggle briefly. We saw the Alabama game where they gave up a ton of points. The Ole Miss game, they gave up 48 to Ole Miss. Didn't think I'd hear that this year, but Alabama did struggle with the big plays at times. But this game, it was a combination of the play calling. I know some unfortunate injuries for Ohio State, but Alabama, the way they were playing, Trey Sermon wasn't going to make a 4-touchdown difference by himself. Wyatt Davis on the line, would have helped things to protect Justin Fields and to help Sermon get some carries, but get some yardage. But Alabama was just too tough today and just too dominating all season. They ran through the SEC undefeated, unblemished, and just, a little scare in that Florida game. But that Florida game, really, they were up, or they won 52-46 in that game. But Florida, I don't know, I never really got the feeling that Florida was going to win that game. Every time Florida came within one possession, boom, Alabama would score again or make a play and make it a 2-possession game or put it just a little bit out of reach. So I never really felt like the Gators were that big a threat as the score showed. Then you had the blowout over Notre Dame. Everybody kind of knew that was going to happen. Notre Dame didn't have near the offense that Ohio State did. They had the defense, but it was just a matter of trying to outscore Alabama, and that's what you're going to do. You're not going to limit Alabama. They averaged 48.5 points this season for a reason. So you weren't going to stop them or barely even contain them. You were going to have to outscore them, and Notre Dame with Ian Book and that offense, they weren't going to do that. And you felt Ohio State had a better chance because of the quarterback play, Fields, if he took more chances downfield. And with that running attack, you felt like they could have possibly pushed Alabama. But the Tide were just too much today. Just too much. Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Devontae Smith. We've heard these guys all year. They've just been dominating all year. You got Jalen Waddle back, and you thought, well, maybe he'd just be used as a decoy. That way you had to account for him and you couldn't double anybody else. But Waddle did have his through the air, and Mechie had his 6-7 grabs. It was just an all-around team effort by Alabama. Great coaching, great play calling, great execution. It's just everything you could ask for the Tide. And, they'll end the season, of course, number 1, the only undefeated team left in the country and the national champions. They'll no doubt be number 1 next year. And, we may be having the same conversation next year. Who's going to stop the Tide, But until then, you just got to roll with the Tide and hope somebody else steps up. Maybe my Longhorns or, Ohio State comes back. I don't know. They're losing Justin Fields and BYU's losing Zach Wilson. And maybe we have a surprise team. Maybe Oklahoma come with Spencer Rattler, and that rejuvenated offense. They sure picked it up the second half of this season. Oklahoma, Texas, with Sark now calling plays for the Longhorns and some of those young horns leading the offense. So it'd be interesting to see a new crop of contenders next year. And hopefully we're not going to get more of the same. It seems to be Alabama, Clemson, and 2 of LSU, Oklahoma, Ohio State, of that bunch. You get rotating teams out of that bunch, and Alabama and Clemson, and then everybody else is just fighting for scraps. But we'll see how the offseason shakes out. We'll see how recruiting shakes out. And college football, of course, will be back next fall. Hopefully with a full season. Hopefully COVID will be long gone and out of here, out of our hair. But I will be back later this week with some predictions of the NFL divisional round. I'll be covering the AFC and NFC matchups separately, so be on the lookout for that. But once again, Garage Game Day Sports. If you're a fan of the show, like what you hear, or want to hear more, want to hear us hit on different topics, basketball, baseball, feel free to subscribe to our channel, YouTube, like our page on Facebook, follow us on Spotify. This podcast will be uploaded probably tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. But my name is Louis Longoria with Garage Game Day Sports. Pleasure covering college football these last couple of weeks. It's been a blast. I will see you guys later this week. But for college football, that's a wrap, guys. I will see you guys later.